The city was a symphony of indifferent noises, a grinding orchestra of steel and haste where the quiet notes of human suffering were easily drowned out. For the man who now called himself Leo, this cacophony was both a punishment and a sanctuary. It was a constant, roaring reminder of the life he had shattered, and a dense fog in which he could disappear, becoming just another shadow on a grimy sidewalk. Each morning, he would wake in the single, cramped room he rented by the week, a room that smelled of damp plaster and defeat. The window looked out onto a brick wall, a perfect metaphor for his existence. He would look at his daughter, 6-year-old Lily, asleep in the room's only bed, her small face a pale, perfect moon in the gloom. For her, he endured. For her, he pretended this hollowed-out life was a grand adventure. Lily was a quiet child, her silence a mirror of his own grief. She had her mother's eyes, a fact that was both a blessing and a daily, twisting blade in his heart. They had been gone for 2 years, his wife Eleanor and their son Thomas, lost in a storm of screeching tires and shattering glass on a rain-slicked road. He had been driving. The guilt was a physical thing, a leaden cloak he could never take off. And so, Arthur Vance, the architect of a global tech empire, a man whose name was carved onto university buildings and philanthropic plaques, had vanished. He had shed his identity like a snake sheds its skin, leaving behind billions of dollars, a sprawling, empty mansion, and a life that felt like a well-tailored suit belonging to a stranger. He became Leo, a dishwasher, a day laborer, a ghost who haunted the city's underbelly, convinced that this penance was the only path to some form of atonement. But atonement didn't pay the rent. Today, his penance had led him to a stark reality. His pocket contained a single, crumpled dollar bill. His pay from the restaurant wouldn't come for another 2 days. Lily's small carton of milk was empty. The dollar was for a new one. It was a non-negotiable expense, the one luxury he always afforded her. He held Lily's small hand, her fingers a trusting weight in his, as they walked into the corner convenience store. The bell above the door chimed a cheerful, mocking welcome. The air was thick with the scent of stale coffee and sugary slushies. Lily, ever quiet, pointed a small finger at the refrigerated section. "Milk, Papa," she whispered, her voice a tiny thread of sound. "I know, sweet pea," he said, his own voice rough. Just a moment. And that's when he saw her. A woman standing by the pre-made sandwich display. She was slender, with weary shoulders wrapped in a neatly mended but thin coat. Her hair was pulled back from a face that was etched with a quiet, dignified worry. Beside her stood a little boy, his face bright with the untarnished energy of childhood. He was pointing at a turkey and cheese sandwich, his whole being focused on it with an intensity only a hungry child can possess. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Clara, picked up the sandwich. She turned it over, looked at the price, and then opened her small, worn purse. Leo watched as she meticulously counted out a small pile of coins onto her palm. He saw the exact moment her hope deflated. He saw her shoulders slump just a fraction. She was short. With a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 other small defeats, she placed the sandwich back on the shelf. The little boy's face crumpled. "But, Mommy, I'm hungry," he said, his voice wobbling. "I know, Sammy," she murmured, stroking his hair. "We'll have something nice at home. I promise." She tried to steer him away, but his eyes remained fixed on the sandwich, 2 small pools of disappointment. Leo felt a sharp, painful lurch in his chest. It was a feeling he recognized. It was the helplessness of a parent unable to provide a simple comfort for their child. He looked at the dollar in his hand. It was for Lily's milk. It was the foundation of their next 48 hours. But then he looked at the boy's face, and he saw his own son, Thomas, who had always loved turkey sandwiches. He saw his wife, Eleanor, who would have given a stranger the coat off her back in a snowstorm. The ghosts of his past rose up, not to haunt him, but to guide him. In that moment, the dollar bill in his hand felt less like a necessity and more like an opportunity. An opportunity to perform one small, anonymous act of goodness in a life defined by a single, catastrophic failure. He walked over to them. His worn boots made no sound on the grimy linoleum. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was so unused to initiating conversation that it came out as a croak. Clara turned, her eyes guarded, the automatic defense of a woman accustomed to navigating a hard world alone. She saw a tall man with tired, haunted eyes, his face shadowed with stubble, his clothes clean but frayed at the alves. She took a small, protective step in front of her son. "Yes?" she asked, her tone polite but wary. Leo didn't say anything at first. He simply held out the crumpled dollar bill. His hand trembled slightly. "For the sandwich," he said, his gaze shifting from her to the little boy. "He looks hungry." Clara stared at the dollar, then back at his face. She took in his worn-out appearance, the profound sadness in his eyes. She saw his own small daughter standing quietly by his side. She understood, with a sudden, gut-wrenching clarity, that this was likely all the money he had. "Oh, no," she said, shaking her head, a blush creeping up her neck. "No, I couldn't. Thank you, but we're fine." "Please," Leo insisted, his voice softer now. "I want to." He pushed the bill gently toward her. Kids should have what they need. The word need hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. It wasn't just about a sandwich. It was about dignity. It was about the crushing weight of having to say no to your child. Sam looked from his mother's conflicted face to the kind stranger. He didn't understand the adult complexities, the dance of pride and charity. He only understood the offer. "Please, Mommy," he whispered. That broke her. The last of her resistance crumbled. Her eyes welled with tears she refused to let fall. She looked at Leo, and for the first time, she truly saw him. She saw past the poverty and saw the person. A flicker of profound, aching kindness in a world that had shown her very little of it. With a trembling hand, she took the dollar. It felt as heavy and significant as a bar of gold. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." She turned, bought the sandwich, and her hands shook as she paid the cashier. Leo felt a sense of release, a small, clean feeling that cut through the fog of his guilt for just a moment. He had done one thing right. He turned to leave, taking Lily's hand. He would figure out the milk later. Maybe the restaurant would give him an advance. "Wait," Clara's voice called out behind him. He stopped and turned. She was standing there, holding the sandwich. She had unwrapped it and carefully, precisely, broken it in half. She walked toward him, holding out one of the halves. "You shared with us," she said, her voice steady now, her eyes clear and direct. "It's only right that we share with you." Leo was stunned. He had expected a simple thank you, a fleeting moment of connection before they both disappeared back into their separate struggles. He had not expected this. This reciprocity, this immediate, unquestioning act of grace. He looked at the half sandwich, then at his daughter, whose eyes were wide. He looked at Clara, and in her face, he saw not pity, but partnership, a shared humanity. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate. He took the sandwich, his rough fingers brushing against hers. For a brief second, a spark of warmth passed between them, a silent acknowledgement that they were two ships passing in the night, who had, against all odds, decided to drop anchor for a moment and share their meager provisions. What she did next shocked everyone, not because it was a grand gesture, but because it was so simple, so pure. She didn't just give him half a sandwich and walk away. She smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up her tired face. "There's a park just down the street," she said. "It's a nice day. We could eat together, if you'd like." And in that moment, Arthur Vance, the man who had run from all human connection, found himself saying yes. The park was a small, hopeful square of green amidst the concrete and brick. An old oak tree spread its gnarled branches like a benevolent grandfather, and the sunlight, filtered through its leaves, dappled the ground in shifting patterns of gold. It was a world away from the sterile silence of Arthur's empty mansion and the oppressive gloom of his rented room. They found a vacant bench, its paint peeling but its surface warmed by the afternoon sun. An awkward silence settled between them at first, the kind that grows between strangers who have been thrust together by circumstance. They were four people from broken worlds, suddenly sharing a small space, a single sandwich, and an unspoken understanding of hardship. The children, as children often do, were the ones to bridge the chasm. Sam, emboldened by the sandwich in his hand, took a large, happy bite. He looked over at the silent, wide-eyed girl beside him. "My name's Sam," he announced with a full mouth. "What's yours?" Lily, who rarely spoke to strangers, looked to her father for permission. Leo nodded gently, a small, encouraging smile touching his lips. "Lily." she whispered, her voice barely audible. Sam, unbothered by her shyness, held out a small, red plastic car he had pulled from his pocket. Want to see my car? It's super fast. Virum. He made a buzzing noise and zoomed the car along the bench. A tiny, curious smile ghosted across Lily's face. She reached into the pocket of her own little coat and pulled out her only treasure, a smooth, gray stone she had found by the river. She held it out to him. Sam stopped vrooming. He looked at the stone, then at her. He took the stone, examined it with the seriousness of a jeweler, and handed her his car. A silent, solemn trade was made. An alliance was formed. Watching them, the tension between Leo and Clara began to melt away. He's a force of nature, Clara said, a fond, tired laugh in her voice. He has more energy than the sun. She's quiet, Leo replied, watching as Lily cautiously pushed the little red car. She takes after her mother. He hadn't meant to say that. The words slipped out, raw and unguarded. A shadow passed over his face, and he immediately retreated into himself, his gaze falling to his worn boots. Clara noticed the shift. She saw the flicker of immense pain in his eyes, a door opening for a second and then slamming shut. She had the grace not to pry. Instead, she changed the subject, steering them back to the safer waters of the present. I'm Clara, by the way, she said, holding out her hand. He took it. His hand was calloused and rough from manual labor, but his grip was gentle. Leo, he said, using the name that had become his shield. It's nice to meet you, Leo. They ate their shared meal in a comfortable silence, the sounds of the children's play filling the space between them. He learned, through small talk, that she had been an elementary school art teacher until the school board made budget cuts. Now she was picking up odd jobs, cleaning houses, delivering flyers, anything to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. She spoke of her situation not with self-pity, but with a pragmatic resilience that he found deeply admirable. She was a fighter, but her weapons were grace and determination, not bitterness. He, in turn, told her he worked in a restaurant kitchen. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. He spoke of the long hours, the heat, the endless stacks of dirty dishes. He found a strange comfort in describing this menial life to her. With her, he wasn't a failure or a fraud. He was just Leo, a man doing what he had to do for his daughter. She listened without judgment, her head tilted with an empathy that felt like a warm blanket. For the first time in 2 years, he felt seen. Not as the tragic billionaire Arthur Vance, or the pitiable figure of a man down on his luck, but simply as a person. She didn't look at his frayed collar or his tired eyes and see a story of defeat. She looked at him and saw a father. You're a good dad, she said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. The way she looks at you, she adores you. His throat tightened. It was the highest compliment he could imagine, and hearing it from this woman, this stranger who had shown him such unhesitating kindness, meant more than any business award or glowing magazine profile ever had. You're a good mom, he managed to say. He's a happy boy. I try, she said with a small, wistful smile. That's all we can do, isn't it? The sun began to dip lower, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. The air grew cooler. It was time to go. The children were reluctant to part, and a new, more complicated negotiation began over the car and the stone. They decided on joint custody. Sam would keep the stone until their next meeting, and Lily would keep the car. The phrase, next meeting, hung in the air, an unspoken question. We sometimes come to the library on Saturdays, Clara said, a little hesitantly. The story hour is free. We like the library, Leo said, perhaps a little too quickly. Saturdays are good. And so, a plan was made. A single, shared sandwich had become the foundation for a tentative friendship. As they walked their separate ways, Leo holding Lily's hand and Clara holding Sam's, he felt a strange lightness in his chest. The leaden cloak of guilt hadn't disappeared, but for the first time, it felt as though someone was helping him carry the weight. He looked back and saw Clara and Sam turn the corner, her bright, mended coat a small beacon of color against the gray cityscape. He had given her his last dollar, and in return, she had given him something far more valuable. She had given him a moment of connection. She had given him a reason to look forward to Saturday. She had given him a flicker of hope, a dangerous, beautiful, and terrifying thing. He still had no milk for Lily, But as he walked back to their dreary room, he realized his heart felt a little less empty. The public library became their sanctuary. It was warm and quiet, a refuge from the relentless demands of the world outside its heavy wooden doors. Every Saturday, like clockwork, they would find each other in the children's section, a corner of the vast, silent building filled with colorful beanbags and the scent of old paper and youthful imagination. Their friendship began to take root in this fertile ground, growing slowly and steadily, nurtured by shared stories and quiet conversations. Leo would watch, a ghost of a smile on his face, as Clara read to the children. Her voice was mesmerizing. When she read, she became the characters, her voice rising to a lion's roar or sinking to a mouse's whisper. Sam would be captivated, his eyes wide with wonder, but it was Lily's reaction that moved Leo most. His quiet, withdrawn daughter would lean in, her small face wrapped with attention, a genuine, unguarded smile blooming on her lips. It was a sight he had thought he might never see again. After story hour, the children would retreat to a small table with paper and crayons, their heads bent together in serious concentration. Lily, who had always been hesitant to draw, began to create again under Sam's enthusiastic encouragement. Her pictures were no longer just gray scribbles. They were filled with color, a bright yellow sun, a green tree, a little red car. Leo and Clara would sit on a nearby bench, speaking in low tones. Their conversations were a delicate dance, circling the edges of their real lives without ever stepping into the painful centers. He learned about her dream of one day opening a small, free art studio for neighborhood kids, a place where they could make a mess and be celebrated for it. Her face would light up when she spoke of it, her passion so palpable it was almost a physical presence in the quiet library air. "Every child is an artist," she would say, quoting Picasso. "The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. I just want to give them a space to hold on to that magic for a little longer." He, in turn, would share small, carefully curated pieces of himself. He spoke of growing up in the countryside, of learning to fix engines with his father, of a love for stargazing. These were true stories from Arthur Vance's life, but stripped of their context of wealth and privilege, they became the simple memories of a man named Leo. He found he enjoyed being Leo. Leo wasn't a titan of industry. He was a man who knew how to patch a bicycle tire and could identify the constellations. Leo wasn't haunted by board meetings and stock prices. He was concerned with finding enough cash-in-hand work to keep their small room. In this simplified, stripped-down existence, he felt a strange sense of freedom. He was being valued not for his net worth, but for his presence, for the quiet way he listened, for the gentleness he showed the children. One afternoon, Sam's favorite toy robot lost an arm. The boy was inconsolable. Leo, without a second thought, took the toy. Using a paper clip from the librarian's desk and a bit of careful twisting, he managed to reattach the limb. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was functional. Sam's tears turned to cheers. He threw his arms around Leo's legs in a hug of pure, unadulterated gratitude. "You fixed him. You're the best fixer in the world," Sam declared. Over Sam's head, Leo's eyes met Clara's. She was looking at him with an expression of such warmth and admiration that it made his heart ache. It was a look that said, "This is who you are. A man who fixes broken things." The thought was both comforting and ironic. He, Arthur Vance, who had broken his own family beyond repair, was being celebrated for mending a plastic toy. The irony was not lost on him, but for once, it didn't sting. It just was. As the weeks turned into a month, then two, their foursome became a familiar sight. They were a strange, cobbled-together family. The quiet man with the sad eyes, the resilient woman with the bright spirit, the boisterous boy, and the silent girl. They would leave the library and walk to the park, sharing a bag of popcorn that Clara had bought, or apples that Leo had managed to afford. Lily began to talk more, her small voice joining Sam's in their imaginative games. She started calling him Sammy, and he called her Lils. She even started holding Clara's hand on their walks, a gesture of trust that made Clara's heart swell. Leo found himself laughing. Real, genuine laughs that started deep in his belly. It was a foreign sound, rusty from disuse, but it felt good. It felt like air entering a suffocating room. He was beginning to feel again, to thaw from the frozen tundra of his grief. He was starting to care for Clara deeply. He admired her strength, her unending optimism, her fierce love for her son. He loved the way her eyes crinkled when she smiled, and the way she would tuck a stray strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. This terrified him. His heart was a mausoleum, a memorial to Eleanor and Thomas. To let someone else in felt like a betrayal. To love again felt like inviting the possibility of another soul-shattering loss. And so he kept his guard up, a fortress of secrets around the fragile, budding hope in his heart. He was Leo, the dishwasher, and that was all he could ever be to her. Anything more was a lie, and he was tired of living a life built on broken things. The past was not a ghost. It was a creditor, and it always came to collect. For Arthur Vance, the bill came due on a Tuesday afternoon. He was wiping down tables at the Greasy Spoon Diner where he'd found a few hours of work, the smell of fried onions clinging to his clothes, when his burner phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a number he recognized with a jolt of dread. George Carmichael, his former COO, his confidant, the only person in the world who knew that Leo was a fiction. Arthur had left him strict instructions. Never call unless the world was ending. He stepped into the grimy back alley, the stench of garbage thick in the air. "What is it, George?" he answered, his voice low and tense. "Arthur, thank God." George's voice was strained, a mix of relief and exasperation. "I've been trying to respect your sabbatical, but this can't wait. The board is in chaos. The Henderson acquisition is about to fall apart. They need you." "They'll manage," Arthur said coldly, staring at the graffiti on the alley wall. "That's what they're paid for." "It's not just that," George pressed on, his voice softening. "It's the foundation gala. The one for the Eleanor and Thomas Vance Children's Wing at the City Hospital. It's next month. It was her passion project, Arthur. Your passion project. You can't just let it." George's voice trailed off, leaving the accusation hanging in the air. Asterisk, you can't just let them be forgotten. Asterisk, the words hit Arthur like a physical blow. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of Eleanor, her face radiant as she broke ground on the new wing, flashing in his mind. He saw Thomas beside her, wearing a small, plastic construction hat. The memory was so vivid, so painful, it stole his breath. "I can't, George," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Don't ask me to. Arthur, how long are you going to do this? This punishment. It's not bringing them back. Lily needs her father. Not this shell of a man hiding in the shadows." "You don't know anything about my life here," Arthur snapped, the defensiveness sharp in his tone. "I'm a better father to her now than I ever was." He ended the call, his hand trembling as he shoved the phone back into his pocket. The brief conversation had ripped open the carefully stitched wounds. The weight of his old life, of Arthur Vance's responsibilities and failures, came crashing down on him. He was a fraud. A man playing at poverty while a multi-billion-dollar empire drifted without its captain. A man pretending to be a simple father while his real son's legacy was being managed by strangers. He finished his shift in a daze, the clatter of plates and the chatter of customers fading into a dull roar. Later that day, he met Clara and the kids at the park as planned. But the lightness he had started to feel was gone, replaced by the familiar leaden cloak of his grief and guilt. He was quiet, distant. His smiles were forced, his eyes haunted. Lily, with a child's unerring intuition, sensed his mood and stayed close, her small hand clutching his. Clara saw it too. She saw the storm clouds gathering behind his eyes. She watched him as he pushed Lily on the swing, his movements mechanical, his gaze 1,000 miles away. The easy camaraderie they had built felt strained, the air thick with his unspoken turmoil. They sat on their usual bench while the kids chased pigeons. "Is everything all right, Leo?" she asked softly, her voice gentle, not prying. He flinched at the name. Today, it felt like a lie. "Just a long day," he mumbled, not looking at her. She didn't press him. She knew that some doors are best left unopened unless you're invited in. Instead, she just sat with him in the silence, her quiet, steady presence a balm on his raw nerves. She didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. She simply shared the space with him, a silent testament to her belief in him, a quiet promise that he wasn't alone in his struggle, whatever it might be. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the grass. "You know," she said, her eyes on the children, "Sam used to have terrible nightmares after his father left. For months, he'd wake up screaming. Leo turned to look at her, surprised by this crack in her own resilient armor. He would never tell me what they were about, she continued, her voice soft. And I learned that trying to force it out of him only made it worse. So I just sat with him. Sometimes I'd sing. Sometimes we'd just sit in the dark until he fell back asleep. The most important thing, I think, was just for him to know I wasn't going anywhere. She turned her gaze to him, and her eyes were full of a deep, profound understanding. You don't have to talk about it, Leo, she said. Just know you're not alone. Her simple act of grace, of offering empathy without demanding explanation, cut through his turmoil. It was a kindness so pure it almost brought him to his knees. He wanted to tell her everything. He wanted to unload the crushing weight of Arthur Vance and his colossal failure. But he couldn't. The lie was too big, the truth too monstrous. How could he tell her that the man she admired for his simplicity was a fraud, a billionaire hiding from his own life? How could he explain that his sadness wasn't just about a long day, but about a self-inflicted exile born from a tragedy he could never undo? So he just nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Thank you, Clara, he whispered. As he walked home with Lily that evening, the weight on his shoulders felt a little different. It was still there, heavy and suffocating, but now it was mingled with a new feeling, the profound, terrifying, and beautiful burden of another person's unwavering faith in him. He was falling in love with her, and it was going to destroy him. The fragile bubble of their manufactured peace was bound to burst. The city was entering a cold snap, a bitter wind sweeping through the canyons of buildings, and the chill seemed to seep into the very bones of their existence. Leo's cash-in-hand work at the diner had dried up temporarily. The owner had gone on a 2-week vacation, leaving him with nothing but the lint in his pockets. The last of his money had gone to the weekly rent on their squalid room. For the first time since he had adopted this life, he and Lily were not just poor, they were hungry. The irony was a bitter pill. A man who could buy the entire city block they lived on couldn't afford a loaf of bread. He sat on the edge of the lumpy bed, Lily's small stomach rumbling softly in the quiet room. His own hunger was a dull, familiar ache, but hers was a sharp accusation. He thought of George's call. He could end this in an instant. One phone call, and a black car would appear, whisking them away from this nightmare and back to a world of private chefs and limitless credit. His fingers twitched, itching to reach for the burner phone. It was pride that stopped him, a stubborn, self-flagellating pride. He had chosen this path of penance. To abandon it now, for something as simple as food, felt like a betrayal of his own grief, a cheapening of Eleanor and Thomas's memory. He couldn't do it. He would not break. He would take Lily to a soup kitchen. The thought filled him with a profound sense of shame, but it was better than surrender. He was pulling on his worn coat, his movements stiff with cold and resignation, when a soft knock echoed on their door. His heart seized. It was probably the landlord, a perpetually sour man named Mr. Henderson, coming to complain about something. Leo opened the door a crack, ready for a confrontation. But it wasn't Mr. Henderson. It was Clara. She stood in the dim, flickering light of the hallway, a large, steaming pot held between two oven-mitt hands. A gust of wind from the hallway swirled around her, but she seemed to carry her own warmth. Her face was flushed from the cold, and her eyes were bright with concern. "Hi," she said, a little breathlessly. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I made way too much stew. Sam's with a sitter, and I thought of you guys." She held the pot out to him. The rich, savory aroma of beef and vegetables wafted into the room, a scent so comforting, so full of life, it was almost painful. Leo stared at the pot, then at her face. He knew she hadn't just made too much. He saw the truth in her eyes. Her intuition, her deep well of empathy, had told her something was wrong. She had sought them out. She had come to their rescue without being asked, without needing an explanation. This simple, profound act of kindness did what hunger and desperation could not. It broke him. All the pride, all the stubborn self-punishment, all the carefully constructed walls around his heart crumbled into dust. A single, hot tear escaped his eye and traced a path through the grime on his cheek. He tried to speak, to thank her, but the words wouldn't come. He could only nod, his throat thick with an emotion so overwhelming he couldn't name it. He took the pot from her, his hands trembling. The warmth of it seeped into his cold fingers. Clara followed him into the room, her gaze taking in the stark poverty of it. The single bed, the peeling paint, the bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. There was no judgment in her eyes, only a deep, aching compassion. She found 2 chipped mugs and ladled the thick, hearty stew into them. She handed one to him and one to Lily, who was now sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with a mixture of hunger and wonder. Leo sat on the floor, the warm mug cradled in his hands, and took a spoonful of the stew. It was the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. It tasted of warmth and safety. It tasted of home. He ate, humbled and silenced by her grace. He was Arthur Vance, the billionaire, being fed by a woman who was barely scraping by herself. The absurdity of it all was staggering. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him not with terror this time, but with a sense of inevitability. It wasn't just admiration or gratitude. It was love, a deep, terrifying, and undeniable love for this woman whose heart was as vast and as nourishing as the sky. He loved her strength, her kindness, her quiet dignity. He loved her for seeing past the broken shell of a man he presented to the world and caring for the person underneath. As he looked at her, sitting on the edge of the bed and patiently helping Lily with her stew, he felt a profound shift inside him. The idea of his heart being a locked mausoleum suddenly seemed wrong. Perhaps it wasn't a tomb. Perhaps it was just a house that had been dark for a very long time, and Clara had just walked in and turned on a light. The thought filled him with a hope so fierce it felt like a second chance at life. But it was a hope tangled in a web of lies. How could he ever build a future on a foundation of such profound deception? The stew warmed his body, but a cold dread settled in his soul. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this beautiful, fragile thing growing between them was destined to be shattered by the truth. The cold snap broke, and a fragile, sun-drenched Saturday arrived, a gift from the heavens. It felt like a fresh start, a day ripe with possibility. They decided to celebrate this small miracle of warmth by spending the entire day at the park. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Arthur allowed himself to simply exist in the moment, to let the heavy cloak of his past slip from his shoulders, if only for a few hours. The park was alive with the joy of a city released from the grip of winter. The 4 of them were a picture of unassuming happiness. They bought a bright red kite from a street vendor with the last of Clara's tip money, and Arthur, remembering a skill from his own long-lost boyhood, showed Sam how to catch the wind. The kite soared, a tiny speck of crimson against the vast blue canvas of the sky, and the sound of the children's delighted laughter was the purest music Arthur had ever heard. He pushed Lily on the swings, higher and higher, her own quiet giggles bubbling up like a hidden spring. He looked over and saw Clara watching them, a serene, beautiful smile on her face, her hair catching the sunlight like a halo. In that moment, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. He felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy, a feeling so potent it almost made him dizzy. He thought, this is it. This is what it feels like to be happy. The feeling was so precious, so fragile, he wanted to capture it, to put it in a glass jar and keep it forever. Later, they sat on the grass, sharing a picnic of peanut butter sandwiches and juice boxes that Clara had packed. Sam was telling a long, rambling story about a superhero squirrel, and Lily was adding sound effects, her usual shyness completely forgotten. Arthur found himself leaning back on his elbows, a genuine, relaxed smile on his face, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin and the warmth of this found family in his heart. He was looking at Clara, about to say something, to try and put into words the gratitude and affection that was swelling inside him, when the world tilted on its axis. It started with a small, tight cough from Lily. Then another. Arthur's blood ran cold. He knew that cough. It was the prelude to the monster that lurked in the corners of their life, her asthma. It had been triggered by the cold and dust of their rented room, a condition the doctors had warned could be severe. He scrambled to his knees, his hand going to the pocket where he kept her emergency inhaler. "Lily, sweet pea, you okay? Take a deep breath for Papa." But she couldn't. Her breaths were coming in short, sharp, wheezing gasps. Her eyes were wide with panic, a terrifyingly familiar look. Her face, which had been rosy with laughter moments before, was beginning to take on a pale, bluish tint around her lips. The inhaler wasn't working. The medicine wasn't getting through the inflammation in her airways. Panic, cold and absolute, seized Arthur. The park, the sun, the laughter, it all dissolved into a tunnel of roaring terror. He was no longer on a sunny lawn. He was back on that rain-slicked highway, the smell of gasoline and wet metal in his nostrils, the sound of sirens wailing in the distance. He saw Eleanor's lifeless eyes, Thomas's small, still form. He was losing her. He was losing another child. He was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated horror of his own past repeating itself. Leo, look at me. Clara's voice cut through the fog of his terror, sharp and commanding. She was on her knees in front of him, her hands on his shoulders, forcing him to meet her eyes. She needs us. You need to calm down. Breathe with me. In, out, now. Her voice was a lifeline in his drowning consciousness. He took a ragged breath, then another, his gaze locking with hers. Her eyes were filled with fear, but also with a steely, unwavering resolve. She was not falling apart. She was holding them all together. Call 911, she said, her voice steady and clear as she turned her attention to Lily. Tell them it's a severe pediatric asthma attack. Cyanosis is present. Tell them we're at the west entrance of Central Park. She began to administer first aid with a competence that was breathtaking. She loosened Lily's clothing, sat her upright, and started talking to her in a low, soothing voice. It's okay, Lilybug. We're right here. Just try to take slow, small breaths. That's it. You're so brave. The helpers are coming. Arthur, jolted into action by her command, fumbled for his phone. His fingers were numb and clumsy, but he managed to dial the numbers. He relayed the information to the dispatcher, his voice a hoarse, unrecognizable croak. The world had shrunk to this single, terrifying point, his daughter's fight for breath, and the incredible strength of the woman by her side. He watched Clara, awestruck. She was a warrior. Her calm, her competence, her absolute focus in the face of crisis was a force of nature. She was saving his daughter's life, while he, the powerful, capable Arthur Vance, had been reduced to a quivering, useless wreck by his own demons. The wail of sirens grew closer, a sound that had once haunted his nightmares, but was now the sound of hope. Paramedics arrived, and Clara efficiently relayed Lily's condition, her non-existent medical history as Lily Smith, her allergies. As they loaded his daughter into the ambulance, a paramedic turned to him. Are you coming, sir? Arthur could only nod, his legs feeling like lead. He climbed in, his eyes never leaving Lily's small, fragile form. Just before the doors closed, he looked out and saw Clara. Sam was clinging to her leg, his face buried in her coat. She looked at Arthur, her expression a mixture of fear, empathy, and encouragement. She mouthed the words, "I'll be right there." The doors slammed shut, and as the ambulance sped away, a devastating realization crashed down upon him. This life he had chosen, this penance, was no longer just about him. It was a danger to his daughter. His pride and his secrets had almost cost her everything. He had to end it. He had to become Arthur Vance again, not for himself, but for her. And in doing so, he knew he would have to face the inevitable fallout. He would have to tell Clara the truth. The hospital was a sterile, impersonal world of fluorescent lights and the antiseptic smell of bleach. Every squeak of a rubber-soled shoe on the polished floor, every disembodied voice over the intercom, grated on Arthur's raw nerves. Lily had been whisked away to the pediatric emergency unit, and he was left in a waiting room that felt like a beige-colored purgatory. He was Leo Smith, a man with no identification, no insurance card, no history. The admitting clerk, a woman with a tired, impassive face, had peppered him with questions he couldn't answer. The bureaucracy of poverty was a maze he was ill-equipped to navigate. Every form he couldn't fill out, every question he had to deflect, was a fresh reminder of the recklessness of his choices. He was a billionaire who couldn't even prove he was his daughter's father. The helplessness was suffocating. He paced the small waiting area, his mind racing. He could make the call. He could call George, and within minutes, the full weight of the Vance empire would descend on this public hospital. Lily would be transferred to the top private pediatric facility in the country, attended by the world's best doctors. The thought was a powerful temptation. It was the responsible thing to do, the fatherly thing to do. He pulled out the burner phone, his thumb hovering over George's number. But then he hesitated. The moment he made that call, the life he had built with Clara, the fragile, beautiful connection they shared, would be incinerated. The man she knew as Leo would cease to exist, replaced by a lie. The thought of the look on her face, the confusion, the betrayal, was a pain almost as sharp as the fear for his daughter. Just as he was about to press the button, the waiting room doors swished open. It was Clara. She had found a neighbor to watch Sam and had taken a cab straight to the hospital. Her face was pale with worry, but her eyes were clear and focused. She came straight to him, ignoring the stares of the other people in the room. "Any news?" she asked, her voice low and steady. "They took her back. They're trying to stabilize her," he said, his own voice sounding thin and weak. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. She was the one who had held it together in the park, and here she was again, a pillar of strength while he was falling apart. She didn't say "it will be okay" or offer any other empty platitudes. Instead, she simply reached out and took his hand. Her hand was small, but her grip was firm, an anchor in the swirling chaos of his fear. "Let's sit down," she said, leading him to a pair of hard plastic chairs in the corner. And then, she did something extraordinary. She took charge. She walked to the nurse's station and, with a quiet, polite authority, began to get information. She had a background in nursing studies before she switched to art, and she knew the language, the procedures. She spoke to the nurses not as a hysterical parent, but as a concerned, knowledgeable advocate. She came back with updates. Lily's oxygen levels were improving. They had her on a continuous nebulizer. The doctor would be out to speak with them soon. She navigated the intimidating, confusing hospital system with a grace and competence that left Arthur speechless. She was his translator, his advocate, his partner. An hour later, a young doctor with tired eyes came out to speak with them. He addressed them both as Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and neither of them corrected him. "Lily is stable," the doctor said, and Arthur felt his knees go weak with relief. "The immediate crisis is over. But I have to be frank with you. Her asthma is severe and poorly controlled. The environment she's in, is there dampness, dust?" Arthur could only nod, the image of their grim, mold-stained room flashing in his mind. "She needs to be in a clean, dry environment," the doctor continued, his tone serious. "And she needs to be under the regular care of a pediatric pulmonologist. This kind of severe attack can cause permanent lung damage. The next one could be fatal. We need to get her on a regimen of controller medications and create an action plan. Do you have a regular pediatrician?" The question hung in the air. A regular pediatrician. It was such a basic, fundamental part of responsible parenting, and he had failed at it completely. "No," Arthur whispered, the word a confession of his negligence. The doctor's expression tightened with a flicker of judgment before he smoothed it back into professional neutrality. "We'll give you a referral to the clinic here. It's vital you follow up." After the doctor left, a heavy silence fell between them. The relief of Lily's safety was now mingled with the stark reality of the doctor's warning. Arthur's experiment in penance was over. It had been a selfish, reckless indulgence, and it had put the most precious person in his life at risk. He looked at Clara. She was staring straight ahead, her hands clasped in her lap. He could see the gears turning in her mind, the worry for Lily, the practical concerns about a clinic, about medication costs, about their living situation. She was already trying to solve a problem that was infinitely larger than she could imagine. "Clara," he began, his voice raspy. She turned to look at him, her eyes full of tired compassion. He had to tell her. He had to tell her everything. Not just for Lily's sake, but for his own. He couldn't bear the weight of the lie another second. Not with her. She deserved the truth. All of it. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. Something important." He knew, with a gut-wrenching certainty, that the next words out of his mouth would either be the beginning of a real future, or they would be the end of everything. He couldn't do it there, not in the sterile, impersonal waiting room of a public hospital, under the hum of fluorescent lights. The truth he had to tell was too big, too raw, too monstrous for such a place. It required air and space, and a neutral ground where the ghosts of his past could breathe. After Lily was settled in a pediatric ward for overnight observation, he asked Clara if she would walk with him. She agreed without hesitation, her face etched with a quiet, waiting concern. He led her out of the hospital and through the darkening city streets, their footsteps echoing in the evening quiet. He walked with a purpose he hadn't felt in years, leading them to a small, manicured park that overlooked the city skyline. It was a place he hadn't been to in over 2 years. A place he and Eleanor used to come. The city spread out before them, a breathtaking tapestry of a million glittering lights, each one a story, a life. It was the city he had once felt he owned, and now it felt like a foreign country. They sat on a cold, iron bench facing the view. The wind was sharp, but he barely felt it. A storm was raging inside him that was far colder. "I don't know where to begin," he said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the distant, shimmering towers of the financial district. One of them was his. The Vance Tower. Clara waited patiently, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, her presence a silent, steady anchor. "You can start by telling me your name," she said softly. Her words surprised him. He turned to look at her. In the dim light from the park lamps, he could see that her expression wasn't accusatory. It was knowing. "You knew," he stated. It wasn't a question. "I didn't know," she corrected gently. "But I suspected. There are things that don't add up, Leo. The way you speak sometimes. The things you know. The sadness in your eyes. It's too big for just a long day." I just knew that Leo the dishwasher wasn't the whole story. Her perception, her quiet intelligence, both humbled and terrified him. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The moment had come. "My name," he said, the words feeling alien on his tongue, "is Arthur Vance." The name fell into the space between them, heavy and laden with meaning. He watched her face for a reaction. He saw a flicker of recognition, of confusion, but not the shock he had expected. The name Vance was everywhere in this city, on the side of the very hospital they had just left. "Arthur Vance," she repeated slowly, testing the sound of it. "The CEO of Vance Industries." "Former CEO," he corrected, a bitter edge to his voice. "I walked away from all of it 2 years ago. And then, the dam broke." The story he had held captive for so long came pouring out of him in a torrent of grief and guilt. He told her everything, sparing himself no mercy. He spoke of Eleanor, his brilliant, compassionate wife, the love of his life. He spoke of Thomas, their bright, funny 5-year-old son. He described the life they had, a life of immense privilege, yes, but also a life filled with love and laughter and plans for the future. He told her about the foundation, about the children's wing at the hospital, Eleanor's dream to provide world-class care to every child, regardless of their family's income. Then his voice cracked, and the story turned dark. He told her about the accident, the rainy night, the slick road, the fundraiser they were late for, the argument they'd had over something trivial, the moment of distraction, the screech of tires, the horrific, final silence. "I was driving," he whispered, the confession tearing from his soul. "She and Thomas, they were gone. And I walked away with a few scratches. The universe played a cruel joke. It took them and left me." He couldn't look at her. He stared at his hands, at the calluses he had earned in his new life, as if they could somehow absolve him of his sins. "I couldn't live in that house anymore," he continued, his voice hoarse. "I couldn't look at their pictures. I couldn't be Arthur Vance, the tragic widower, the billionaire object of pity. Every dollar, every building with my name on it, felt like blood money. So I ran. I created Leo. I thought if I lived a life of hardship, of penance, if I suffered enough, maybe I could atone for what I did. I deserved to be nothing. I deserved to be homeless." He finally fell silent, the confession leaving him utterly spent, utterly exposed. He had laid the ugliest, most broken parts of his soul at her feet. He waited for her judgment. He expected her to be disgusted by the lie, angered by the deception. He expected her to be dazzled or repulsed by the scale of his wealth. He expected her to get up and walk away, leaving him alone on the bench with his ghosts. He had prepared himself for anything but the silence that followed. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She just sat there, the city lights reflecting in her still, deep eyes. The silence stretched on, each second a fresh wave of agony for Arthur. He had destroyed the one good thing that had entered his life since the darkness fell. He had shown her the monster, and now she would flee. He finally risked a glance at her, and what he saw on her face shattered his expectations. It wasn't anger. It wasn't pity. It wasn't greed. It was a look of such profound, heart-wrenching compassion that it took his breath away. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears, but not for herself. They were for him. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but it carried across the chasm of his confession with the clarity of a bell. "The day we met," she began, her gaze still fixed on him, "I was at my lowest point. I felt like a failure. I couldn't even buy my own son a sandwich. I felt invisible. And then this man, this stranger with the saddest eyes I had ever seen, gave me his last dollar." She paused, letting the memory settle in the cold night air. "That man," she continued, her voice growing stronger, "didn't see a charity case. He saw a mother and a hungry child. He didn't act out of pity. He acted out of a kindness so pure it stunned me. And then, when I offered him half, he accepted it with a grace that told me he understood what it was to need help." Arthur could only listen, his heart hammering against his ribs. This was not the reaction he had braced himself for. This was something else entirely. "The man I got to know at the library," she went on, a small, sad smile touching her lips. "The one who patiently fixed my son's broken toy, who listened to me talk for hours about my silly dream of an art studio, who made my friend's quiet, scared little girl laugh for the first time. That's the man I know. That's the man I've come to care about very, very much." She finally broke her gaze from his and looked out at the glittering city. "You can tell me your name is Arthur Vance. You can tell me you're worth billions of dollars. It doesn't change the man who sat with me on a park bench and shared a sandwich. It doesn't change the father who loves his daughter so much he would walk through fire for her. That man is not a lie, Arthur. That man is the truest thing about you." She turned back to him, and now a single tear did trace a path down her cheek. She reached out, not with hesitation, but with a firm, certain tenderness, and her fingers gently brushed away the tear that was tracking down his own. "You didn't just lose a wife and a son in that accident," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You lost yourself, too, and you've been punishing the survivor ever since. But Eleanor and Thomas, do you think they would want this for you? For Lily? Do you think they would want you living in the dark, punishing yourself for something you can never change?" Her questions were not accusations. They were loving, gentle probes at the heart of his pain. "You've been carrying this all alone for so long," she whispered. "It's too heavy for one person to carry. You don't have to punish yourself anymore, Arthur. It's time to let them go. It's time to come home." And that was the shock. Not a gasp of surprise at his wealth, not a cry of outrage at his deception. It was an act of radical, unconditional acceptance. She saw all of him, the billionaire and the pauper, the hero and the broken man, the lie and the truth, and she chose to love him anyway. She didn't want his money. She didn't want his power. She wanted to heal his pain. She offered him not judgment, but absolution. She offered him not pity, but partnership. In that moment, on that cold bench overlooking the city, Clara, the woman who had nothing, gave the man who had everything the only thing he truly needed: forgiveness. Arthur looked at her, at this incredible, resilient, compassionate woman, and for the first time since that rainy night, the leaden cloak of guilt began to feel a little lighter. He didn't fall in love with her in that moment. He simply realized he had been in love with her all along. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers lacing with hers. It wasn't a gesture of desperation anymore. It was a promise. "Okay," he whispered, the word a surrender and a beginning. "Okay." The return of Arthur Vance was not the seismic event the business world had anticipated. There was no grand press conference, no triumphant return to the boardroom. It happened quietly, with a series of phone calls made from a hospital payphone. The first was to George Carmichael, whose stunned silence was followed by a flood of relieved questions. The second was to the hospital administration, and within the hour, Lily was being transferred by private ambulance to the Eleanor and Thomas Vance Children's Wing, her mother's legacy, now her salvation. The transition was surreal. One moment, Arthur was Leo Smith, a ghost in the system. The next, he was Arthur Vance, and the world bent to his will. Doctors appeared, consultations were arranged, and the path to Lily's care became a smooth, unobstructed highway. But Arthur was a changed man. He was not the same ruthless, work-obsessed titan who had disappeared 2 years ago. The penance he had served, however misguided, had etched a new kind of wisdom onto his soul. He saw the world through different eyes now, through Leo's eyes. He saw the cracks in the system, the quiet desperation of people like Clara, the daily struggles that were invisible from the penthouse suite. The first thing he did was not to reclaim his corner office, but to establish a new home. He couldn't return to the cavernous, silent mansion filled with ghosts. Instead, he bought a warm, light-filled brownstone on a tree-lined street, a house with a small backyard where the children could play. It was a home, not a monument. Clara was his constant companion through it all. She was his anchor, his counsel, his conscience. When the lawyers and accountants descended, speaking a language of trusts and holdings that made his head spin, she would be there, a quiet presence, reminding him with a single look of the man he wanted to be. She was unimpressed by the sudden influx of wealth. When he tried to give her money, to repay her for her kindness, she gently refused. "Our friendship isn't a transaction, Arthur," she told him firmly. "Don't try to make it one." Instead, she accepted his help in a different way. He learned of the mountain of debt she was in, the student loans and medical bills she had been chipping away at for years. He paid them off, not as a gift, but by creating a grant through his foundation for single mothers pursuing education and making her its first anonymous recipient. His biggest, most important project was the foundation. He poured his energy and resources into transforming it. It would no longer be a passive, name-brand charity. He envisioned something active, something that would make a real, tangible difference. And he knew just who should run it. He took Clara to a dusty, abandoned warehouse in a struggling neighborhood. "What do you see?" he asked her. She looked at the grimy windows and the vast, empty space. "I see a lot of work," she said with a laugh. "I see potential," he said, his eyes shining with an excitement she hadn't seen before. "I see the Clara and Sam Art and Community Center. I see a place with free classes for every kid in this city who wants to paint, or sculpt, or just make a glorious mess. I see a gallery for local artists. I see a computer lab, a tutoring center, a safe place for kids after school. I see your dream, Clara, and I want you to build it. I want you to be the director." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked around, her imagination painting the space with color and light and the sound of children's laughter. "Arthur," she whispered, I don't know what to say." "Say yes," he said, his voice soft. "Help me do some good with all of this. Help me make it mean something." And she did. The final scene was not one of corporate triumph or extravagant wealth. It was the grand opening of the community center. The warehouse had been transformed. It was a vibrant, joyful space, buzzing with energy. The walls were covered with children's art, a chaotic and beautiful explosion of color. Clara, looking radiant and confident, stood at a small podium, dedicating the center. Arthur stood in the crowd, not on the stage. He was holding Lily's hand. Lily was healthy and thriving, her cheeks rosy, her laughter easy and frequent. Beside them stood Sam, who was already eagerly pointing out his own masterpiece on the wall. Arthur wasn't looking at the stage. He was looking at Clara, his heart full to bursting with a love and admiration that was as deep and as real as anything he had ever known. He was no longer a broken billionaire or a homeless dad. He was just a man who had been given a second chance at life, at love, at family. Later, after the speeches, the four of them were in the main art room. Sam and Lily were at an easel together, their heads bent in concentration, working on a shared painting. Arthur came up behind Clara and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. They watched their children, their family, in comfortable, happy silence. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "For what?" she asked, leaning back against him. "For everything," he said. "For the sandwich. For saving Lily. For saving me." She turned in his arms to face him. "You saved yourself, Arthur," she said, her eyes full of love. "I just held the light for you." On his new, uncluttered desk in the office of the foundation, there was only one picture. It wasn't a glossy photo of his new family. It was a simple, lopsided crayon drawing, done on cheap construction paper. It showed four stick figures, two big and two small, holding hands under a bright yellow sun and a rainbow. It had been the first thing Lily and Sam had drawn together in their new home. It was a picture of a found family, pieced together from broken parts, made whole by an act of kindness that began with a single dollar and a shared sandwich. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't arrive with a thunderclap, but with a quiet gesture. A single dollar, offered without expectation. A shared meal, given in fellowship. In a world that often measures a person's worth by the size of their bank account or the height of their success, it's easy to forget that our true value lies in our capacity for kindness. Arthur Vance had all the money in the world, but he was bankrupt in spirit. He was a prisoner of his own grief, living in a self-imposed exile. It wasn't his wealth that saved him. It was the simple, profound humanity of a woman who, despite having so little, was rich in the things that truly matter: compassion, grace, and the courage to love. Their story reminds us that we all have the power to change a life. You don't need to be a billionaire to make a difference. You just need to be willing to see the person in front of you, to share what you have, and to offer a hand to someone who is struggling. One small act of kindness can ripple outward, creating waves of hope that can heal even the most broken hearts. It can build a family, restore a soul, and remind us that the most valuable currency we have is love. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a little inspiration today. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that celebrate the power of the human spirit. Until next time, be kind to one another.